Everybody, and welcome to the Winnetka Village Council study session for October 10th, 2019. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask that everybody either turn off or mute your cell phones or other electronic devices. And we'll move forward right into the meeting with public comment. This is the time of the evening where anybody from the audience who wishes to address council on any item that is not on the agenda, they're welcome to come to the microphone and share their thoughts with us. Is anybody?
Actually, it's something that's not on the agenda.
Okay.
I thought I would do it, kill two birds with one stone. Hi, I'm Renchenko. So yes, I would like to mention something. So I've kind of been back and forth a little bit with Steve Saunders. I guess I just want you to be aware. So I am willing to work with the village and potentially help. So I want to put more pollinator-friendly plants, specifically for bees. Actually, thinking more late bloomers because they have a lot. Anyway, but so I was going to put this in the parkway, kind of in front of our house, and I can just put some plants down and stuff. But I'm also willing to pay a little bit more, and I could like they did in Kenilworth, where they tried to do like little swales, and they were going to put plantings in their parkways, and I guess they all fell through. But I would be willing to kind of help with the cost. Put like a little bit of swale in there, and kind of grade it, and even put a little bit of the retention in there, obviously things to work out. But in order for that to be of any value, the village would have to help. We probably, so I'm kind of near the top, but not at the top, so there'd be some runoff coming down the street. I would need a curb cut, to kind of funnel some water into that. And I'm willing to, work with the village about this. If, at first Steve said he could kind of think of it as a test plot, but then he got back to me and said, no, that's not going to work out, just, but anyway, I'm thinking since I'm going to be spending the money anyway, if this is of interest to the council, or that, maybe it's something that you guys could discuss with staff, and because I'm going to do it, I'm going to put plantings there anyway, and I'm willing to do a little bit more and, figure out some way of doing something.
So relative to village assistance, is it just a curb cut, or?
Well, pretty much the curb cut would be the only thing I would really need. But then also we'd have to, be agreed that what I was going to. So I think I would. It's technical, but there are things that when I first reached out like months ago about this, there were like all these things brought up that I was like, well, no, that sounds a little crazy to do. There'd be some.
Okay.
Anyway, so just something I wanted to bring up.
Thanks, Ted. Anybody else? Okay. So I've had multiple conversations with Kimberly Brya about some issues over at, in general, some issues relative to village processes and coordination over at Crow Island School for a starter. And Kimberly, I think you've met with Mickey, right? And yeah, and I'm sure that you've met with folks over at the school district as well, with Dawn. Okay. And rather than having a one-on-one, this is somewhat of an interesting and complex issue. So I told Kimberly I'd be happy to let her come up and share with her thoughts. It's going to be more than a 3-minute presentation. That's why I asked her to come to study session. And so we can engage a conversation and see if there's any way that the village may be able to add value to the conversation. So with that said.
Can I sit at the table?
Sure.
Is that all right? Just because I got handouts and that way it's easier.
Can you guys hear back there?
No, you got it. I can speak up.
Okay.
Ann and I can, sure. All right, I'm going to pass this out first. I'm all about positivity and moving forward and thinking about positive things that we can do to improve communication. This was sparked by, or spurned by, some circumstances that happened around Crow Island School and District 36 and so on and so forth. But what I had wanted to talk to you guys about tonight, and I'm going to be very brief, and the topic here is optimizing communication for relevant village resident engagement. Okay? A lot of big words there. And the objective here is how do we reach relevant residents as effectively as possible using multiple means of communication? It does not help all of you, or design review board, or zoning board, or any of the other planning commissions, et cetera, when information is discovered after the fact. And in my case, there probably weren't too many of you that went around to all of the boards and presented, here's what you approved, and this was the fact of the matter. And they kind of like, oh. So better to, be in front of it than be behind it. So that's kind of the thing. So communication, I've been on the community house women's board. I've been on the executive committee of my church for 10 years. I've been part of District 36, 203, so on and so forth. Oh my God, communication is so fraught. I mean, sometimes you want to get out the hot air balloon. You're like, really? We've done this a million times. How can we not get it? And we all just have to embrace that fact. I mean, it's flawed and it's hard. People consume information very differently. Some people are visual, some people are verbal, some people you have to tell 12 times before they get it. People have very busy lives. I mean, I've had people say to me, Mickey, for one, well, why don't they just look at the website? Well, I'm sorry. I don't have small children anymore. Why would I go to the Park District website? 20% of this village has kids in that age bracket. That's it. That's it. So it's like, you can't just use that as your primary source, or even their little directory book. They say, oh, it's all on the back. Well, I look at it to see if my nieces and nephews' pictures are in there, and then I throw it away. So you have to think about what are the relevant tools. And really, we become SUV land. And people are moving really quickly through things. So you think, oh, I put a sign up, sort of to the point, Chris, you and I were talking on the corner of Pete's when I was with Mickey the other day, and you're like, but there's a sign right there. And it's so high up, people weren't seeing it. Now you've got another one at Starbucks, which is awesome. It's fantastic. So the layered communication that I'm talking about is this. You need to think about meeting people where they are in a way that's really clear, really easy to read from a car, easy to read in letter form, so it's not thrown away, it doesn't look like you're going to be arrested, and I have some examples of that, and addressed to someone that is going to actually open it. So let's just talk about some examples. So let's talk letter first. This was sent to us in the mail, and it was actually addressed. We use Dave Schoen is head of
Community development.
That wasn't a quiz, I just couldn't remember. So they send out this information using the Cook County Assessor's Office. Well, my husband and I both own our home evenly, Thomas and Billy Bryant. But it came to Tom Bryant. Well, in our house, I divide the mail. If it's got both of our names on it, I open it. If it's just him, I give him his pile. He sees something like this, and he's like, oh, this has nothing to do with me. I don't know what the hell this is, and he throws it away. Okay? Now, I said to Dave, what if, not changing any of the language whatsoever, because I appreciate it's a legal thing, and so there's stuff you can fuss with and stuff you can't. Here you go. Exhibit 2. So what if, and I did this in 5 minutes. This was not, we weren't doing brain surgery here. I just took red and reorganized some things, created some headlines and some titles. And this all of a sudden becomes much more clear and much more legible. Now I know, what is this thing? When is it? Where is it? Why do I need to be thinking about it? It doesn't take much to do this, right? The other piece, and I forgot these examples at home, I just received a notice from, I think it was Public Works, saying that my meter needed to be replaced, and it was addressed to resident. Now again, it's a village group, right? Addressed to resident. I opened it up. I said, you have to call this number. I did, and it's done. The school uses this assessor's office thing, and it's addressed to just Tom, and so something like this gets thrown away. I think we need to figure out how do we, if we're sending stuff through the mail, how do we do that so we make sure people get it? I don't care if it says Tom and Kimberly on it. If it says resident and it comes from the village, I'm going to open it. But if it only has my husband's name and he's not plugged in, I mean, I love my husband and he does a lot of really great stuff, but he's not plugged into stuff like this. He's just like, it's not, and he throws it away. So that's point number 1 on letters. Point number 2, and David and company have already done this. So I don't have multiple copies, so I'll just show you this. This is what the signage used to look like when you were doing a zoning thing, and it was like, oh, hey, public notice. And so actually, this was spurred by, I thought it was you guys. I gave you credit for it. The big sign on Chestnut that the shop owner had with the big fingers that were in yellow, and it said, hey, the village is doing this whole streetscape thing, and here's the list of all the trustees and everything else.
sorry.
Yeah, and it was actually great. I mean, it was colorful, it was bright, I understood what it was. So David was great, and he took us to heart, me, the little me to heart, and he at least added red to it, okay? So now there's red to that, and I think there's places here for pockets of information. So he and that group wonderfully are moving along on this. I don't know where they are on, this letter, but again, so now we have a written form, we have sort of a visual form, and then as I list on here, there's other things, and one thing I missed, sorry, I didn't press this piece of paper, so added at the bottom, social media. Like right now, the Winnetka Northfield Chamber of Commerce has a Facebook page, and they just sent out things saying, hey everybody, the stores on Chestnut are all open, even though there's a whole lot of construction and chaos. It's real, if you have someone, whether they're a department that already exists, or a human being you could hire, or whatever it is, who can manage social media, that is where you meet people. Nextdoor Winnetka is replete with people talking about what's going on, and who needs what, and everything
No
else.
kidding.
Yeah, well, okay, so I read it too, I see it too. So, but the point is, sometimes in this day and age, you have to meet people where they are, and snail mail just isn't quite what it used to be. And especially if you send it out so it looks like, well, we're gonna arrest you sometime in the near future. I'm just not paying attention to that. This, at least for Pearl Island, wasn't directly in front of the construction site. It was at the corner of Willow and Glendale, and I know Penny knows this. If you ever had kids who went to school there, morning, noon, and pickup, it's a goat rodeo with cars. I would never see this in one years. So we've got to find ways to reach people ahead of time and get creative with it. So for example, I love the posters in Village Hall downstairs, but the trees have been there for like, I don't know, 10 years. I think we're done with the tree thing. And as I even said to Mickey, I'm like, all of my friends, none of us know that there's a 2030 lakefront plan. Have no idea. And if you talk to John Munoz and you talk to Mickey, they're like, well, 2016, and yeah, it's in the website. I'm like, go to the website. So how would I'm one of the 80% of the people in this village who really has no interest. So how else would I know? So we have to get creative about that. I am willing to be helpful. I mean, my whole world for the last 35 years has been in strategy and communication and branding. And if anybody needs help in thinking through this stuff, or how might we, or what might we, I am happy to be part of that conversation. But I think, and then that also, I know you, Chris, have done this, or this body has done this, where you're being more connected to parks and schools and library, and I think that is enormously important, that there is an oversight to them, because there's, we're only as good as the people that sit on those boards, and sometimes, that's just not as tight as maybe other boards are at other times.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that there's cross communication. The other thing I would offer up is I'm now obsessively reading the village newsletter that comes out. Was it once a week, I think, on Fridays or something like that?
E-blast.
The e-blast, okay. I love that thing because it gives me headlines on what's going on and so forth. I think we ought to have some small section that has major headlines about parks, library, and schools. So for example, in the 2030 plan for the park, they're doing the protecting the lakefront. The erosion. Thank you. That's my spokesperson when I can't think of it. The erosion thing. So you put that on there. And if it's the library, you put I just saw the whole new schematic on the library kind of thing. And if it's the schools, it's the redistricting. It's not the little nano stuff. It's big picture things that if people are looking at the village of Winnetka, the village of Winnetka includes park, library, school. It's not just village, blah, blah, blah. So there's a degree to which we can really cross-pollinate the communication and find new and different ways to speak to people so that you guys have the richness of the input that you want on important topics. And the way to do that is to make sure you're getting to people, not necessarily just through snail mail, but if you're going to do that, you might as well do it so somebody might pay attention to it. So does anybody have any questions, or I'm just going to wrap that up? I don't think you can hear me. It's not complicated.
Penny, you should have something to say about
Well,
this.
Surprise, surprise, Kimberly and I have talked. But I mean, we've worked together in the
Oh,
past.
gosh,
We
yeah.
were, Kimberly co-chaired the referendum, and so I think that we have made great strides as a village, but we there's a lot more we can do. And the one big lesson, which I say ad nauseum, that I learned from the referendums is that, as Kimberly said, everybody takes in information differently. So you need the snail mail, you need the social media, you need the web, you need everything.
Right.
But it needs to be connected. We need to have, so that there's a visual signal that we automatically know that these are all the same, the message is the same, because, and we've, as we're moving ahead with our communication strategy, and talk to Megan and
Why don't you
relative to
mention
the
something
website.
about that?
Right, in terms of how we can make our communication as visual, as punchy as possible, but also, again, how can we work with the other bodies, because it behooves us to have everybody informed about everything that's going on. And it would be an interesting conversation to have with the other boards, if there's something we could do to work together to have, a once a week, and it wouldn't just be us, the village, responsible for getting the headlines, but, that it would be a cooperative effort. Because it really would be great if there could be, just one e-blast or something where you could get all the headlines rather than having to look for all the different
Right.
boards.
And then if they want more information, they can go to the
Right.
website and find out. That's absolutely right. It's
Right.
spot on.
Right.
It's so important.
Yeah, so there's a spectrum of things that need to be done, and obviously there are priorities, but I think the time is right to think about this.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I think trying to break the silos is really a long-term exercise, and I think there's, you bring up a good point, Kimberly, that having a central dispensary is,
Yeah, Andrew's like, no.
We don't allow those.
He's already recused himself.
He's just coming off of that whole marijuana talk.
Want to put it on your list?
Yeah.
I got a picture to show you later. But, I mean, a central clearinghouse for all the information, okay, how's that? Would be helpful, and the good news is we've just retained a new, what do you call them, Megan? A website
platform?
Web designer.
designer? So, we're bringing our website into the 21st century as well.
Useful too.
And, maybe there's opportunities in that, and maybe it is just in the weeklies, but, the issue, I'm not poo-pooing the idea, but if the village becomes the one responsible for promoting this stuff, the other taxing bodies have to make sure that, by Thursday at
Right.
5 o'clock, they have all their information into
Right.
who's ever running the show here,
Right.
so they can just cut and paste it into the weekly report, and it gets out. I don't think it's a hard ask.
No.
And I've got my quarterly breakfast with the presidents coming up, and, that'd be a good time to at least mention it.
And it doesn't, again, we're not talking nano information here. We're talking really big, top-level stuff.
Yeah.
Right, and if you want information, then go to the website.
You want to make sure people know about it, right, exactly. I personally, this is a Kimberly thing, and especially since you now have a new web developer designer, I view Winnetka as Winnetka and the village, trustees, and the body of the village. And then underneath that is schools, parks.
You might have to edit that out of the notes this week.
I kind of like that idea, but I'm not
I mean, if
gonna
it were me, I would have one
Turn it-
website that is the village of Winnetka.
turn off the film for a
Oh, for
minute.
the website,
Yeah.
not meeting
No,
government.
not meeting government, but if you were agreeing with Winnetka, and you want information, you'd go to the Winnetka Village website.
Right, of
And
course
then
you would.
up in the bar, the nav bar, up there are big blocks that say park, school, and library. And so if you want to click to that portal and shoot right through to it, fantastic.
Right.
But this way, it's all, and then the front page above the fold could still have, like the newsletter does, the big nut information. So if you just came to the landing page, you'd go, oh, well, that's going on, interesting, I want to read more about that. If you want to read more village stuff, then you scroll down. I know a little bit about building websites and web development and that kind of
And we
thing.
can
But
use links more.
it's just, but that would be so cohesive. It would all be pulled together, and everybody still owns their own deal, but at least then you have the power and leverage associated with the entire entity and mothership. Not, well, I only represent 20% of the village of Winnetka at the park district because it's just kids, I mean, the men's club for golf is all separate. paddle is separate, tennis is separate, that's all communicated by the grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really doing, like hip-hop cheer, so it,
Maybe you should.
Maybe you should, yeah.
only if you do it with me.
Okay, so I just cannot reinforce enough how right you are about the coordination and about presenting a village and that this is where people come to. I don't want us to be in the business of updating the information for the others, so just a simple link, I think, is the best thing to have, and like, headline, yeah, just a link, and that takes them where,
A
you know.
real
the
easy thing
newsletter.
you can do, and I don't know what content management system we're using, but pretty much all of them, you can get a plugin. It'd be like a little window, and it'll automatically aggregate data that we
Yeah.
designate out of there, so that
Yeah.
we're not even.
Oh, you don't have to touch it, that's the beauty
Yeah.
of this.
Literally, it's like a window into theirs, and so
Right.
we could, without.
And you're talking about two different,
What's that?
Do you not have shared content management?
No, but.
You use separate platforms.
Yeah, even if you have a separate platform though, you could, I mean, literally,
have
you
the
can have a window
URL.
that's even pulling from CNN if you wanted. So.
Oh,
any-
Megan has a new
This is
project
government.
now.
No, Megan did not have.
So in the scheme of things, this wouldn't be the top of our communications priority, but it's
It's,
something that we
it's
would like to
basically how the
accomplish.
patch
but
works.
it,
No,
but
I
also
get it.
Facebook,
Yeah,
the
exactly,
newsletter,
right? I
That
mean-
is an
Full
easy
stop.
go-to, that is a
I don't
really
think you want
easy.
your newsletter to look like the patch.
Can I ask a
No,
question
no,
though?
no.
Can we have a group of citizens who look at the communications who go, like, this is really very much easier?
Here's our communications
Yeah,
liaison.
we've
Do you have citizens, civilians that come in and help you with it?
Civilian, I'm
'Cause,
excited.
we're actually talking about that relative to the web design, and in terms of
Because you have
moving
some,
down.
this is much easier to look at.
Moving down the road when sort of the structure is in place and then try to figure out how to do content, so
Yeah.
that's, it's been part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's nice to get more people involved.
Yeah, I'd be happy, I think that's, we often, and I do too, when you write things, you tend to, you see it so much that you think, oh, this is perfectly clear, until you show it to someone and they're like, well, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, right,
So
and,
it's just-
and a lot of our stuff, including the agenda reports and everything, it's, there's a focused audience, which is us, for example, so it's pretty technical, but
Right.
for the lay people, who are just looking at it for the first time, it's not clear at all, so.
And
So
for
you
people
keep
who
it-
don't like to read, which I include myself in, but no,
Right.
I like it when I get the agenda here, I know I can see that, but like, your description on these two documents is exactly right, and I would just look at when is it, that's the most
Right.
important thing to know.
And what is it?
So,
Right.
and what,
Yeah,
then you
right.
can figure out what.
So
but
David
then-
has this, so
Right.
hopefully
Yeah.
they're moving in that direction, and obviously it's moving in the direction of the signage. I would hope that social media would become a part of the village, forward push announcement, so that that is where people live. It's just where people, they're consuming small, short bites of information. They're not going to websites unless they're doing some deep dive. That's how they consume stuff these days, and we have to meet them where they are in order to make sure we sort of get the right richness that you guys want of
Because,
consumer
let's
feedback.
face it, coming to these meetings is difficult, and most people don't, why would you? And so we need to make ourselves accessible to the
Yeah,
community.
one other thing to note is that, Rob and Megan created Josie's position now, so we actually have a position that is the communications person in the village, and that's the first time we've ever, it's always been on somebody's desk who's got 20 other things going on, and now there's actually a person who is responsible for this stuff. So, we're hoping that some of the input that we get from the community, along with the updated website, that a lot of this stuff will start to come to fruition. But it's important that we get feedback from people that are not in the flow, because it's so easy to miss something as obvious as just, I looked at that, and to be honest with you, and I know you thought about it before you did it, Kimberly, but, this is the way I read things normally, right?
Right.
And it told me everything I needed to do just by glancing at the red stuff, and I could make a quick decision on whether I cared about it or not, right?
Right.
So it's little simple things like this that make a big difference. Something that probably nobody here would have thought of unless you
Well,
brought it to our attention.
You know
So-
what, everybody, really, David is so busy and so overwhelmed with
Right.
all that stuff, and honest to God, you get in a job and you're like, well, how do we do it, and this is how you do it. And it's not like he's not thinking, how do I do it differently? It's not until some nut like me, it's like, well, I have an issue, and I'm like, well, what the hell is that, and when did that happen, and well, I can make that better. So it just, you know, I mean, but I'm happy to be helpful in whatever way I could for this body or anybody else as it relates to trying to find ways to improve communication, cross-pollination, anything having to do with that. Because it's just, I would much rather have been in front of all of you talking about GD, Pearl Island playground, and what I look at every day. And hopefully, the study session I go to with the school on the 24th, they will approve the planting of the evergreen trees that in fact Becky and your school board approved like ages ago in order to block such things will actually do. If they don't, I'll be back in front of you saying, what did you guys do? There you go.
Well, Kimberly, thank you. This is really helpful, and I think it's enlightening, and I think it's the sort of thing that we need to keep revisiting to make sure that we're getting the message out as good as possible.
Like I said, let me know.
There are a lot of outlets out there, and some aren't easy to embrace, and some are pretty easy to use, right? And
Right.
we should be thinking more about that. The good news is with the group we have at the other end of the hall, there's a lot of those conversations going on. But it does help when somebody brings the specifics to the table. It really helps us move things
My
forward,
pleasure.
so.
Like I said, if there's anything I can do to be helpful, I know you guys know how to reach me.
Yep.
You know where they live. Yeah, you know where I, yeah, you know where I live. Exactly.
Oh,
Thanks a
thank
lot,
you,
guys.
Kimberly.
I at least know where to find you on Friday, so.
Thank you, guys.
See you, Kimberly. Okay. Moving along, item number 3, net metering. The village's net metering policy allows Winnetka users of renewable energy sources to sell excess power to the village at wholesale energy rates. Tonight, the council will discuss amending its reimbursement policy, and here to review the Renewable Energy Production Credit Program is Electric Department Director Brian Keys. So, well, whatever, no, then why don't you come on here? Can you
grab one of the
Can you folks hear okay? Okay. I bet you John forgot it was tonight. I knew somebody was going to.
I had to get my mind.
Thanks for the introduction. And unlike a lot of the topics I have an opportunity to present where we're talking about more mundane things like buying a real cable or pad mount transformer, this one is always develops
Water rate studies.
energy, not solar energy. It's already been pointed out to me, the topic of net metering, for those that are close to the topic, that maybe net metering is maybe not the best choice, but it's really the calculation of the value of what the renewable energy credit would be for excess energy delivered to the village's system. And kind of just for a high-level tutorial, when a customer engages in, whether it's with the Village of Winnetka or ComEd or Ameren, to sell excess energy back to the utility, it's metered. So for most of our homes, the meter is looking at power delivered to your house, and that's what generates your electric bill every 2 months in Winnetka, or monthly if you're outside Winnetka. But then the second scenario is if you've gone through the process and have an interconnection agreement, the utility installs what's called a bi-directional meter. And so what it's looking at is not only the power that's delivered to a customer's house, but also measures the energy or the power delivered back onto the utility system. And the scenarios that happen is just like your own homes. I don't think any of you have solar from what I, looking at the addresses that we currently track.
Not that kind.
Not that, okay.
So I've got the little lights out in my front yard.
You're sending a lot
Yeah,
of power.
we haven't hooked you up to this. Actually, your house is the Holiday, we have to put an extra cable into
Exactly.
your. So you have a scenario where even for those customers that have went through an interconnection situation, the scenarios come out like the following. There's a period of time where they're actually buying all their power from the village. In the middle of the night, they're not getting any solar. There's no wind resources currently in anybody's home that I know of, so it's all really solar photovoltaic. So they're buying. The second time is on that sunny day when they got their air conditioners running, so they're generating electricity from their solar panels. They're consuming it all behind the meter and maybe still buying some from the village. So instead of paying the 13 cents a kilowatt hour, they're saving that 13 cents a kilowatt hour by what they basically generate and use at the same time it's being generated, and either lessen or eliminate getting power from the village's system. The third scenario, and before I jump into the policy, is where they're on vacation. It's a moderate day, they don't have their air running. And their solar panels are active solar, and they're putting excess energy onto the village's system. So they're placing that energy that's not being used in their own property back on. And then, as mentioned in your opening remarks, President Reyes, we currently are paying a wholesale cost for that energy. So the discussion tonight is really not what happens behind the meter at their house. It's really what value you want to place on the energy that's returned to the village's electric system. And then you can take wherever you want to go, but that's kind of what I'll lead you through. So I've kind of stepped backwards to the time, or going forward. So I joined in '07, and in researching and talking to my staff that's since retired, I think the first time this really came up was in 2006, and a resident on Sheridan Road, not the same resident that has solar panels now, approached staff formally in writing and said, we want to be the first home in Winnetka, put solar panels and be interconnected. That went to the village council, and there's not a lot of information in the minutes, but what's been conveyed to me from my staff at the time was, and looking at the lack of changes in ordinances and code, is I get it didn't really go anywhere that I can see or materialize. In 2008, legislation for the state of Illinois went into effect that mandated investor-owned utilities to offer one-to-one net metering for residential customers. So ComEd and Ameren, I think it was actually developed in '07, but implemented effective in 2008. ComEd was required to let customers hook up solar systems and offer one-to-one, so what basically a retail rate. So any energy, if they were charging you, let's keep it nominal, 10 cents on your utility bill, they had to give you an equivalent 10-cent credit for any kilowatt hour delivered onto their system in that excess period. One-to-one net metering. So within, utilities were exempt from that. So municipals in the state of Illinois were not required to have net metering. So the Utility Association basically encouraged utilities, it's in your best interest to develop a policy for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to come to your community if it's going on around you. And two, in the absence of you taking action, or if you don't provide an outlet for it to happen in some shape, form, or fashion, someone will likely want to include you in some type of mandate. So that discussion happened in 2008 with the village council. And basically what the discussion was, it was a lively discussion in a number of fronts, but basically what this decision at that time was an individual that wants to put up solar panels, that's the village didn't have a problem allowing them to interconnect to the electric utility. We did put some caps on the size because it was kind of like we're wading into new territories. That's a 10 kW limit, which there's probably an opportunity to tweak that going forward. But basically the position of the council was when energy comes back onto the village's utility system, we only want to pay what we would have to pay to get it from somewhere else, in this case IMEA. So because you have a solar system and have the either the desire or the affordability to put that on your house, me as your neighbor or an adjacent property owner or a ratepayer to the utility shouldn't bear a cost for anything above the cost of the electricity. So it was really viewed as a purely financial avoided cost scenario. If you're going to give us excess power, we'll pay you what it would have cost us to buy it from IMEA. So outlined in my staff report, there was basically staff was given policy direction to frame that up. It came back in the form of an ordinance and a resolution, so it was actually required changing the village code. Some more good discussion, and the policy was shaped a little bit. And ultimately in November 2018, the council adopted the change in the village code. And also subsequently every utility rate resolution has language in it that allows for this renewable energy credit. So at a high level, or not to get into every little standard, but basically it defines renewable energy as being basically a full solar, photovoltaic, or wind, like a micro wind turbine. And there's not one that I know of or anybody that's ever applied. There's been a couple people that kind of poked at it, but really never got to an application point that I know of. We set a capacity limit of 10 kW. For the most cases that we've been able to make it work for the 4 people, and people have talked to me, that 10 kW in most cases is about the amount of roof space that most homes can accommodate this by the time you do the setbacks on the perimeter. And we've looked at, there's probably opportunities to change that in the future, but that's really not tonight's discussion. We do credited at the wholesale electric rate. So the rate that you set when you approve the village budget, or basically it's the purchase power rate that's in the budget, 6.6 cents this year. That's what the homeowners get for kilowatt hours delivered to the village's system. So we know how many kilowatt hours, we give them the wholesale power rate of 6.6 cents, and it shows up as a credit on their utility bill. They provided, the council wanted information that they're, instead of asking them to have insurance for it, all we really ask them is show that their insurance doesn't have a clause that precludes solar systems. Some safety labeling and an outdoor disconnect for basically design practices. There's some industry standards. And then they pay for the cost of the bidirectional meter, which for a typical residential house is $60.
60?
60. It's come down, I think, when Mr. Winnichenko put his in, it might have been closer to 90. I forget what we ended up, but I mean,
What's the cost of a regular meter?
it's not, it's really almost 60, they've about the same price. And so basically what it is, it has different registers in, so it
Yep.
can read in and out,
Got it.
basically, is what, so that's kind of where we're at today in the current policy. I mean, I kind of went through it, but it really comes down to the value of what you want to put the energy on. So now, since that policy was put in place, I've had an opportunity to talk to the environmental committee, both formally and informally, and residents. Mr. Winnichenko, I've talked to him several times, and he's approached the council. And so, in the EFC actually approached the council in their annual update for boards and commissions in 2015. And so, their recommendation stems from some work that the former village president had a little angst with me. Had some discussion about, working with the environmental committee, you got me in a little trouble. But basically what we attempted to do, the discussion that always came back is we're generating, on a July day, we're generating electricity, and it happens at a peak time when the village is using peak electricity. That's pretty true to the most part, with a little variation. So the variation is that when the solar peak output happens at any of the houses in Winnetka, it's about a 2-hour difference from when we have our peak. But it's still meritable that it is lowering our peak.
Wait, I'm sorry, can you?
It's a
So
delay,
like,
right?
well, so like when, in general speaking, peak solar output might be in the 3 to 5 o'clock period, and our peak for the electric system is 5 to 7 p.m.
Okay.
So there's still solar output coming out, but it's not its maximum output.
And there's no way to bank it.
There's no way to bank it, not yet. There's some, well, Tesla's work, it has some things that they're working on, but and a couple residents are looking at that, to be honest, to bank it in their own house. But no, it doesn't get banked, it's real time, they deliver it to us. So what we attempted to do is to try to put some financial analysis to that, and then, albeit it was somewhat wrought with some assumptions, but what we looked at, courtesy of Mr. Winnichenko, he had interval data for solar output of his system. So his system, and I don't know if it still does it, but he was shared with the village. Basically, I think it was 5 or 15 minutes, every 5-minute interval data of how much energy is coming out of his solar system round the clock for almost over a year period of time. We also knew, since he had been a customer, how much energy he's using, and so we started taking what his buildings were, with his consent, I should say.
Yeah.
So I can't see what he's, yeah, well, he consented, and as part of trying to, look at this in a different perspective. So what's on Exhibit C of page 21 of your packet is a summary, and I try not to recreate it, but what we did was we overlaid his solar output and his energy consumption onto the village, like looking at how the village utility bill as a whole, the wholesale bill, would kind of be impacted. And without going into probably like the detail where everybody wants to throw me out in like rate studies, is our wholesale electric bill has not only we get charged for how much we use in a month, but the peak demand. And when we actually implement that rate, just like ComEd does at the residential level, you take that and you aggregate it down to a price per kilowatt hour. If you are a large commercial customer, you actually, or even a commercial customer, you have a demand charge and a kilowatt hour charge. So in trying to address the concept of we're reducing the village's peak, and there's more to this than just 6 cents, we laid it across, and again, it's one customer, And there's some assumptions used in trying to model that, but we tried to put, like, say, how's this look financially? So on page 22, basically what it says was, the village was getting probably about a $67 benefit. If you look at purely analytical, based on, at that point in time, trying to lay it against the bill, that beyond the value that we were applying intrinsically at the wholesale level, there was probably an additional $67 benefit that we were getting by basically shaving a tiny bit off the peak in summer months. And when you look at it, the output is just what you might, suspect looking at. A peak in January, short of, we're peaking when President Rentz has his Christmas lights on when it's dark out, but there's no solar production, so there's really, you wouldn't expect that the solar is gonna impact our peak in January, February. But in the middle of July, you still have good sunlight through 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock. So there is some solar output. So the environmental committee recommended at that point in time the council consider potentially looking at like a kind of a spot in between where they, trying to recognize that there was some benefit to the summer production. It's come back with a different, so they looked at like an average of the whole, they recommended maybe take an average of the wholesale rate and the retail rate and offer that for energy that came back on the village's utility system.
Brian, can I just clarify something here?
Yeah.
So you're saying that this was a 2015 analysis you did of this?
Yes, I think it was 2014 and it got presented like 15 is when.
For a year. And you're saying that the benefit to the village from his system was $67.
Right, so
For the whole year.
the additional, so beyond the avoided cost, it was $67.
Okay, I just want to make sure. I
But
understand
that's
that.
not in excess of his bill, that's just credit, $67 power.
To the wholesale bill. So if we tried to overlay it and said, at the end of the day, like layering this on and how it impacted, we're talking very small numbers at the end of a big number when you're, the whole village is compared to things. But we thought we could capture it at it's about a $67 benefit to the village. So we're paying for the wholesale cost at 6 cents. But for those summer months, there was some incremental benefit that he was lowering our peak demand by a fraction, but there was some value you could
So
attribute.
without his system, the whole usage charge would have been $67 higher.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this chart correctly. So, the part that's in red, does that mean that's the amount of village energy he was using?
So basically, what happens is the numbers that are in red is where the utility was incurring additional costs.
What do you mean, village energy?
Well, so when we layered his use over it, what we did was we layered his consumption over the top of the village's wholesale bill, so we had to go buy power, so our bill went up a little bit.
Okay, so
Energy.
meaning he didn't generate enough to cover his usage?
He was, so he was,
What?
Come on, Ted.
I may be able, because I know what you're trying to say.
Just come on up.
So what Brian did,
Here,
Everybody's gotta have a microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Nothing records.
what Brian did is they took my 5-minute data, and so they knew how much I was putting on the grid. And then this chart that he came up with was, it's based on how much I get paid. So I'm getting paid 6 cents, I'm getting paid the wholesale rate, I make X number of dollars in the year. But when we looked at the benefit I gave to the village, my production resulted, in addition to the money that I got paid, there was another $67 that I saved the village as a whole that I did not get reimbursed for.
Because of
So
surcharges, because of high demand.
Well,
Is that-
because
Because we're drawing less from IMEA.
we're drawing less on our
Resources
peak demand.
On our peak, and
So-
that has a charge associated.
because the village gets billed for electricity, as Brian was saying, it's a total usage in the month plus the peak hour. So whatever that peak hour is, it affects the whole month. And so on some of the months, a couple of the months, my system was generating enough power that it dropped that peak demand a little bit, but it dropped it more than I was getting back from the village. So I like to think of it as I was subsidizing the village.
Well, it's not-
Do you agree with this?
Well, I mean, do I agree with the analysis?
Yeah.
I mean, based on all the assumptions, as Brian, there's a number of assumptions here. It's 1 year, it's one house, it's, I mean,
Right.
there's.
I know, but I mean, is it a well-founded?
I think,
Analysis?
I mean, I give him a
B
B
plus?
Can I ask another question?
I didn't calculate.
Relative to I mean, we're just talking about literally the price of the energy, right? There's no infrastructure cost included in this fee?
Right, so when we set this up, if a customer, for some reason, when they approach us about the interconnection, the way the code's written is they bear all costs that the utility incurs to implement their interconnection. For the residential customers, the 4 that are in the system right now, that cost was literally only changing the meter. Okay, now they had to pay an electrical permit fee, there was an electrical inspection, but I'm gonna say the utility cost, what the water and electric department assessed them, is only the cost of changing the meter. And actually, we only charge them the meter, not the sending the lineman out there to do it.
But that's after they've already paid to install the system, right? So
Right.
the resident has paid for a system which could theoretically be considered infrastructure. I mean, Solar City, right, was a way of funding. Because one of the things I was wondering is, was there any thought given, this is a really interesting, like, rate discussion and all that, but I don't know if it's time to do this, but like, we get sort of lost in the numbers here, talking about the purpose, why are we thinking about the rate change compensation? Are we trying to encourage more residents to put solar on their houses? Do we think that the savings alone of what you don't spend and how quickly you pay down your system with having it isn't sufficient to create, right? I mean, this is sort of my question is, why are we having this discussion? And then, is there a role that we're trying to give to the utility? Because, like, should the utility then, instead of, or be actively encouraging, and should we be financing customers to put this on their houses, and so customers could be paying the utility to do it? Like, I'm just saying, like, there's such a range of places for the utility to be in all of this, and so many reasons why we're looking at this, that I feel like we need some kind of purposeful contextualization, like, what are we trying to?
I think,
What's our goal
I
with
think,
this?
well, no, I think fundamentally, you know, and this is the way it came from EFC, is there's a much larger, more global issue here. One of moving to sustainable energy sources and decreasing dependence on less sustainable energy sources like coal, like
Right,
et cetera, et cetera.
and that's
And s-
inevitability.
And so by encouraging individual residents to generate power in sustainable fashion, we're actually reducing our carbon footprint and doing a lot of good things for,
Right,
for
but we have the
the
issue,
universe.
like, but we have to think about it, right? If we encourage enough people, but not quite sufficient, that we end up crippling our utility, right? Because the utility then shrinks in the number, or how much power it's purchasing, or the number of people it's serving from the old basis, and they can't sustain without getting the income right. They're busy paying out to all the solar people. I'm sure there's some minimums that you have with the IMEA that you have to buy from them, right, in order to get the rate? Or you
No,
could
it's
just say,
It's full requirements, so so in theory, you've identified some of the tricky policy issues that face collectively the community. So in theory, if a large number of people put solar on, those that don't, or the cost of the system, that's the remaining cost to maintain the system, it has to get
Exactly.
leveraged through the remaining kilowatt hour costs that are paid out. It's kind of,
Yeah, before we get into this, I want to go back, I'm sorry, just to
Okay.
understand the basic, because the question I asked wasn't answered in terms of the fee that's being, or the cost that's being charged, that kilowatt hour charge. Does that cover any infrastructure, or is it strictly the cost of the
the
power?
kilowatt hour that's credited to these customers
Right.
is based on the wholesale cost of power, has no infrastructure component.
So then, the retail price, does that include any infrastructure?
Retail that you pay as a
Right.
customer covers the infrastructure cost. That's the capital, the staff, the maintenance, and the power.
Okay, so my question is, because, you know, it took me a while to wrap my head around this, because I understood the whole issue differently when we've been talking about it. I thought, when they were talking about retail cost of power, I thought it was referring to like ComEd, and that just strictly for the power, that when they generate, they charge strictly just for the power, not for the infrastructure, a surcharge, you know, that's their profit margin. So that's what I was thinking about.
Let-
So
So,
that's, I need to clarify.
Let
What
me go,
exactly it
let me
means
back
about
up for a second
Yeah.
to use the level of vernacular so we're on the same. So in the context of this discussion, we'll call the IMEA rate the wholesale rate, and just to keep the numbers simple, we'll call it 6 cents a kilowatt hour. So we buy it at 6. The village sells it to a residential customer at 12. 12 is the wholesale rate.
The retail.
The
The
rate.
retail
I'm
rate,
sorry,
which
thank you,
includes-
sorry.
which includes infrastructure.
Infrastructure, delivery, staff. So in ComEd space, if
Right.
you're, I'm at my house, I'm a ComEd customer. and
Right.
If I had his system, I pay them 12 cents a kilowatt hour for everything that happens inside my house, lights, air conditioning, all that. Any excess energy that I place back on ComEd's system,
Yep.
I get 12 cents a kilowatt hour.
Okay, I didn't understand that. I thought it was the
In
cost of
Winnetka.
power plus a surcharge, okay.
In Winnetka,
Got it.
you get 12 cents a kilowatt hour
Right.
is what you're gonna pay for any energy you use at your house. The current policy is any excess energy that goes back on the village's system is paid at the same rate that it would cost us to buy it from IMEA, 6 cents. Trustee, to answer.
But just, I mean, just to answer, to understand the logic, I don't get the logic behind why the law says that a customer should be reimbursed retail, which, you know, the infrastructure, you're just talking about power.
Because they're
not
trying to
infrastructure.
encourage
So-
solar.
So it's
a
a,
subsidy.
so they're subsidizing it, okay, so that's. it's a-
ComEd was not happy about that.
Right, so it truly is a subsidy, it's not because that's,
No,
okay.
they're trying to encourage behavior.
Well, right, but it is.
Well, Commonwealth Edison isn't, the federal government was, when they laid down the regulations, they required the major utility companies to rebate at the retail rate.
At the retail rate.
Commonwealth Edison, it's not a decision they made.
Right,
It was
right,
made for them by
right.
Washington.
So, you know, they're a for-profit company, we are not, and so then, you know, it's not like it cuts into our profits, it redistributes the cost to
Sure,
other people,
if we did that.
if we did that, right, and, so it's a different calculation for us, and the quote-unquote profits go to support other village activities, not into, you know, investors' pockets.
But back to the question on the table, to Ann's point. You know, if we're gonna tackle this on a global basis, we have a whole bigger meeting to talk about here. The EFC, the way I read this, the topic on the table is the reimbursement rate.
Yes.
The EFC tried to deal with it.
Right.
They made a recommendation. Brian's put together information. To me, this is nothing more than what is the rate? Are we going to keep the rate the way it is, or are we going to adjust it? And that's the topic on the table. The topic on the
Fundamentally.
table
So if
is
we-
not.
if we-
But it's
if we
important
do
to
that-
understand
I
the
will say that-
background and
well,
why
they're
it's
fine.
in
I mean,
the
we-
first
Is
place.
in process.
Okay, and if we
So-
do
Wait,
that,
say
then
it again?
I think we
So-
have to limit this to a 5-year horizon and reconsider it, like
that's
whatever
fine,
rate
whatever.
decision we make, or maybe a 3-year
It can be
horizon.
reconsidered every year.
Right, because I don't think that we're in a place to make a decision, because it's been languishing forever. We don't want to make a decision on rate compensation that we have to be held to for years
You can
ahead.
change it.
You can always change it.
Well,
So,
is-
just a couple of points. I was at the 2015 meeting, and the first thing I wanted to say is I want to
I was there
apologize
too.
to you.
That's okay.
I'd like to apologize to you. I'd like to apologize to Chuck Downing. It was a horrible meeting.
I'm sure.
And it shouldn't have gone down that way.
Yeah,
And I think it was a miserable failure on the part of this council. This is not a massive issue, it's a small issue. It was never presented as a major issue. It was, hey, here's something kind of common sense that we could do. Our experts were recommending it. On its face, it was the Village of Winnetka, which presents itself as more progressive and has the means to do things that are good for our community, treats solar customers less favorably than in neighboring towns, and that just seems sort of wrong. And I thought it made a lot of sense, but unfortunately, because of the way that meeting went, this didn't move forward. Now, there are a whole bunch of issues. You know, Winnetka, we were just awarded the Soul Smart Bronze Award. I was at the award ceremony for that, and there were some interesting things that came out of that. One of them was, you know, the biggest cost of solar these days is not the hardware, it's the regulatory cost, meaning like us, permits, stuff like that, that goes with it. So what's happened with solar hardware over the years is the price of that hardware has gone dramatically down. If you look at Germany, that has corresponded with homeowners actually having substantially lower costs to get solar. In the United States, that's not happened. It's not happened because of bodies like this.
Well, do we permit it? I mean, what
It
sorts of?
goes, I can't speak to all the details, but it does go through a community development permitting process.
We are a massive part of the cost. It's like 60 to, I think it's like 60% of the cost is because of our red tape. So you're right when you say this is like a small part of it. This is an easy win. We do need to tackle the rest of it. With the Greenest Region Compact Initiative, one of the things that's been highlighted is identifying additional things for solar and trying to tackle some of those regulatory things. If we want to move up from bronze to gold like other communities, those things need to be tackled. But I think it's a small thing. And it's not going to bankrupt our system. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people doing it. It would be great to see more people doing it. One thing that we should all remember, and it's been on my mind since day one joining this council, is we've got that damn power plant on our lakefront. That is not a permanent solution, and that's going to be a massive cost. You know, every year, how often are we like replacing generators and incurring massive costs? The extent we can get ourselves off of that thing, maybe residents generating solar helps us get there. That would be great. So the concern about, well, you know, we're going to shift infrastructure costs. Well, maybe not. If we can get enough residents cranking out solar, maybe that would help.
Right,
I
right,
can't say for sure, but we're talking.
right.
I don't want to. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to extrapolate this too much.
Yeah.
But
This
there-
is a small thing.
Brian still
And I
has to
think we
make
should
his
do it.
point about what happens when you get to tipping points on
We
this whole
change the rates.
transitional,
We change.
right?
We can change the rate whenever we want.
Well, so like what
We're
are
nowhere
the,
near it, though.
what are the regulatory costs? I mean, maybe that's what we need to be looking at. Maybe that's.
But that's not what's on the table tonight.
This-
So we can look at that at another meeting.
Please.
Or solar and
There's four.
Four.
Could I just add one more thing to this, and then I'll give it back to you, Brian? To me, the fundamental issue that I think that we're addressing and what has continued this conversation is there's an inequity here. We have a resident, okay, yeah, it's only $67, but it's an inequity. If I stood out on the sidewalk and grabbed somebody from Noah's Ark and said, give me $67 for your new streetscaping, you know, it would. I agree. So the reality of it is that what happened is, and I was there in 2008, and actually I looked at the council back then, and I remember voting on this, and there was a lot of unknowns at that time, and so at that point, the wholesale rate seemed equitable and had the most common sense. If we buy it from IMEA, or we buy it from TED, or we buy it from the three other people in town, why should we pay more? That would be inequitable for the rest of the taxpayers. So that was how we landed there. However, you know, as the data began to get collected, there's nuances to this that aren't just as simple as a flat rate. And I think that was the issue that you guys were trying to tackle back then, Andy. I wasn't around, so.
Yeah, I mean, all this work had been done. It was an opportunity to fine-tune that initial step you guys had taken in 2008, and we just choked.
11 years ago. But EFC came up with what they thought was an equitable solution, right? And that's the whole fundamental thing here. It's just, you know, is it equitable for these 4 homeowners that might end up being 400 at some point in the future, hopefully? Is it, you know, they're doing the right thing and they get to give us an extra $67 for doing the right thing.
Right.
And that's, I think, the fundamental policy question. And whether or not the EFC hit the sweet spot or not is, I think, what the debate is. You know, the good thing about, you know, and Ann, what you were saying is about the rate structure is if IMEA charges us 10 cents,
Right, no,
We pay 10 cents from the customer.
I'm not against this. I'm not against solar at all. I mean, I'm gonna put it
Oh,
on
no,
my
and
house.
I'm not suggesting
So,
that.
And I do think there's giant savings for the homeowner. I have it on my house. I have it in hot water, which never worked. But the photovoltaic does work, and people are seeing it work. So, you know, I mean, I put it on the house in 2010, whatever. I was way ahead on it, trying to be. But it didn't work then. So it's exciting to see that there is some residual value. I will say that I have spent a lot of time on this, and that other experts, I know we proved out that Ted's owed $67, and you know, it's not unlike taking your data and amalgamating that with, you know, social media and the externalities that creates and the wealth that creates for others. And you obviously have a right to that as the person who's providing that. But because of what you touched on before, the peak time of day for solar system versus the peak time of usage for the utility are different. They're not the same, and there isn't a storage system that works yet. And so the reality is maybe there is $67, which we've proved out, but other people who are deeply in the industry don't agree that there is that extra value that is being accrued. So I'm just saying, like,
That's why they're not proposing retail, though. They're proposing the average of the wholesale and retail.
Just one thing I'm sorry.
No, I'm not, no, they're not. They're saying in the summertime we should go to the,
No, but the EFC.
There's 4 different scenarios.
So for your discussion, I added another recommendation option, another option, in which we haven't gotten to. But, so the EFC said average the two together. And what I presented, since based on saying there is some benefit during the summer months, and summer months are defined in our current rates as June, July, August, September, it said, okay, if you, for lack of better terms, split the baby is summer months pay retail and non-summer months pay wholesale. 'Cause
Right.
it's
So
not-
that would do what? That would be like 133% of retail, of wholesale?
No, 12 cents versus.
No, if you do 4 months, 8 months at wholesale,
8 months.
and 4 months
Yeah.
at retail, you're 133% of wholesale. And just,
Page 25 is the.
I mean, is that about right, Brian?
Hit it. Oh, you're doing the math faster than I, you're like
Yeah.
Doug Williams, right back and
Okay, but let me just say, you know, and again, I'm a simple guy, but $67 on Ted's credit is about a 20 or 20, we're shorting you about 20 or 25% from what, generally speaking. If you went to this other program, you're 133% of wholesale. If you do what the EFC says, you're 150% of wholesale. So somewhere in there, we just make a decision and do that. I mean, he should not be shortchanged, but we don't know if your neighbor, hang on a second, your neighbor who's doing the same thing has as good a system as you.
Right.
And he may only be giving, you know, getting $10 back, you know, to the village. And so I don't know that we just have to get it so that you're not being shortchanged, in my opinion.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So, I think that, I appreciate the fact that that you're all talking about this. I really, I've brought this up lots.
Yes.
But I think that the thing that I have tried to, I think, make clear from my point of view is that we did not install solar panels because we were hoping to get, 12 cents a thing, 6 cents a thing. We ultimately did it because we felt it was the right thing to do. If you look at the preamble to the net metering statute, it says, this is what the legislature finds and declares, that a program to buy net electricity metering is defined in this section for eligible customers can encourage private investment in renewable energy resources, stimulate economic growth, enhance the continued diversification of Illinois' energy resource mix, and protect the Illinois environment. So they acknowledge that this entire idea of net metering has nothing to do with what's fair in terms of like who's paying what. They, I think, acknowledge that they're giving a subsidy to those people that are going to do this thing to, for all these other benefits that they are, suggesting exist. And I guess that's what I have been trying to put forth. So when we installed our system, we had a guy come out and he had this great little presentation. He put all these numbers together this was a different time than it is now, but he was able to calculate that our system would pay for itself based on the credits at the time and all that stuff in 12 to 13 years. Until it was determined that, oh, wait a second, there's no net metering in Winnetka. And then when you recalculated that, the payback went out to like 20 years. So when you have a product that has a lifespan of 25 to 30 years, few people in Winnetka that are financially prudent are going to say, you know what, I'm going to pay up front for a benefit that I may or may not see 2 decades from now. And I think the whole idea behind net metering was the idea that we want to encourage people to do the right thing. And if that means shifting some of the money from people that don't have solar to people that have solar, that's a good thing. Now, there's no reason, in fact, in the net metering and statute, there's actually, I think it's like 10%. Once there's something like 10% production or something, there's reconsideration. So there's nothing that says it has to go on forever, number one.
Wait, I'm sorry, that
And-
10%.
and-
10% of the population.
And then I think you
10%
sounded
of the energy.
referencing the state,
The state,
state sort of comment.
This comment. So once comment has so many customers, they are able to do other things. They don't have to follow the net metering.
Okay, so is that just for comment or is it for
That's
energy?
comment, that's
It's just for
comment.
comment, okay, thank you.
But I guess the point that I was trying to make in all of this is that we as a society, as a community, as a government, you guys subsidize all the time. You subsidize and penalize all the time. Taxes penalize, you give subsidies. I make the kind of the spurious argument that why should I pay for Sheridan Road? I almost never drive down Sheridan Road. I live over here on the west. I go to the Edens. Why am I subsidizing all this road work that's east of me that I never use?
It is
Well,
spurious.
But the point is that I understand that it's a greater community, and and I feel like we should be subsidizing those things that we want to encourage. And if paying retail rate gets more people, at least at the beginning, till you get some sort of critical mass, to install solar and decrease our energy consumption and help the environment and, ultimately, make the technologies better and bring down costs, I think we should be doing it. And as it's been pointed out, it's nothing that all the community, all the customers around us, don't already have the advantage. If we're going to say we're progressive, if we're going to say that we are looking towards the future, all these things, then how is it that we are less interested in supporting this type of environmentally sound business?
Well, Ted, you know what, again, I think that's a whole bigger issue. You could take that in a lot of long directions if you wanted to. For those of us who want to compost, we're going to pay our own composting because we may think that composting is good, it's our way to help things out, but I'm going to pay for it myself. If I want to buy electric cars, I'm going to go buy electric cars. I think that's good. I think there are a lot of ways to accomplish what we're talking about. It was your decision to put in the system, which I admire, by the way. You should not be shortchanged. I mean, I think it's a travesty that you've been shortchanged, but I disagree that we should be subsidizing across the rest of the village for that. You could take that, why don't we, if we really want to incentivize that, why don't we pay 4 times the retail rate to get people to do this? I mean, how far, do you go on this? It seems a matter of fairness to me. And while I share your global perspective, I do know that Brian told me that IMEA is buying wind. IMEA is starting in a big way to get onto renewable energies, maybe up 10, 15% or so. I mean, I know this because in my business, I follow these utilities that are generating non-regulated power, and I think it's great. In fact, they're buying wind, you told me, power from a Florida utility. That can make there is an enormous impact if all these utilities are doing that. We're just dealing here with our fellow residents and trying to keep things as fair as possible. You've been treated unfairly. We should just treat you fairly. And to me, that's the end of the story.
What's the amount of power that's generated by the solar system over the course of a month?
I generate about 11 megawatt hours a year.
Would I have a dollar value?
I've got that, so Is it okay
It's
if
right
I
here.
jump, so on
Yeah.
page 24, and this gentleman was raised his hand at some, I don't know how,
Well, just go ahead.
so on page 24, so kind of, I'll fast forward to what I have left. There's 4 individuals in the village we're not gonna have approached the village, have went through the process and have an interconnected system where they're delivering energy to the village's system. The page 24 shows under the current policy for the last 3 years and year-to-date 2019, the credits that have been issued in totality and then by individual customer A, B, C, and D. Okay, so basically, customer A, that's for you to decide, that's for you to say who you are. So for an unknown entity who might be customer B sitting to the left of me, his credit for year-to-date 2019 was $202.34. And you probably check my, knowing his throne, probably check my math to make sure that was correct.
But
All right,
it's
so,
not bigger than
so that gives you a snapshot of the credits that have been issued by the villages, by the village, we'll say, or the electric fund, to those 4 entities, both in totality and individually. So there's 4 customers, that's the wholesale, under the current policy, the wholesale is nominally 6.6 cents. So not to add confusion to what was in the discussion in the packet. I'm
Hang on,
sorry.
Brian, can I ask one question on
Yes.
customer B? In the year 2018, you get a credit of $321.02.
Yeah.
What was your, how much did you pay for power
Oh.
for 12 months for that?
I'm kind of energy hoggish, things like that.
That's okay, I mean, you might be standard for the village.
So-
Actually, I think I'm a little below for the village, but I feel energy hoggish. I'd have to look, because our bill is, so it's all one price, and I don't really look at it, but I'm gonna guess I paid probably $100 a month more, or
I guess I looked at it in kilowatt hours, so customer B still had an electric bill,
Yeah.
even though he had the solar system. So he was still paying for kilowatt hours consumption, so his system did not generate, I think on the.
So
Except
let's
you
assume,
do
let's assume
before
it's
and
$100
after.
a month, so it's $1,200 a year as the electric bill. 202 is
I don't
is the
know if
credit,
it
so
is
the
kilowatt hour.
net bill is $1,000.
I didn't look at it for what, from that perspective, so. I
But
apologize.
if, like, look at your own bill, like, I mean, I'm in the process of doing this. And so if you look at how much you spend and how much you could generate, you save so much money if you put a good solar system on your house now, the photovoltaic.
But do
So
you, but
it's
do you generate excess of your monthly usage?
only occasionally. And so that's what that shows.
So,
Very,
No, I mean,
Very,
his,
very low.
his is just a credit.
that's
Of
the excess.
321.
That's its excess. That
No,
credit
no, I don't think
defines-
so. I think that's just the credit, right? That's not.
That's
That is,
That's
but
the
but that
excess.
represents the excess.
Right.
So it's,
When he created
gets
an
a- if
excess,
he-
that's what it was
if he's
valued.
If he gets a
paid-
bill of $1,200.
He's paid 6 cents for that.
And I
Excess.
get charged 12 cents when I take it. So essentially,
They'll-
think the village is a battery.
he's using the village as a battery, so his excess came at a time when he wasn't using it, that's what we're calling the excess. In theory, if you look at purely, like, took his total consumption and looked at his total that he generated, it wouldn't be an excess, but because of the privilege of he's parking it when he's generating excess, that's what we're calling excess. So on a day when he was at work, the windows were open, no air conditioning, bright sunny day, he didn't use that electricity, so he gave it back to the village. And we paid him at what it would have cost to buy it from IMEA, 6.6 cents. Now, the other 12 hours of that day, he came home, he turned on all his entertainment systems, his air conditioner was a meat locker, and it got dark out, so he was buying way more energy than he actually delivered for the day.
Yeah, no, I understand. What I'm trying to figure out is if you've got a meter running one way, it's sending $321 over the course of 1 year back to the village. But then he's got the bill, the meter going into the house that is saying he's paying $1,200
I paid about $2,400 for electricity.
in 2018.
I'm looking at these bills here. Yeah, I guess it's 2018.
But that's net of, you
That's-
also produced your own
Yeah, so
energy.
and then you subtract the $300, so that was like.
No, I mean, to get your bill, but you didn't.
But
do
you
it.
produced
I'm
it
sorry.
for your
And I
own
did- So there
consumption.
was, in addition to $2,400 I paid for the village, I produced a ton of power too, that I
So-
used.
Because your bill would have been much larger
Yes.
if you didn't have your solar system.
Correct.
but you paid $2,400 and.
So the credit was done on that, okay. Because that's what I wanted. What's the gross bill?
I'm
and what's
thinking
the-
like, for my budget presentation last year, you you guys can correct me when I present this year, but I think I said the annual kilowatt hour for a customer was like about a $2,100 bill.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just say, let's just say, it might not be perfect averages, but these 4 people probably paid typically around $2,100 in electric costs to the village. And then you can see what credits then they got back, and assuming he might, I don't know if he's an overachiever and underachiever with respect to average, but, so say it's $2,100 for a discussion point.
Except not really, because if he's producing, it could be it could have been, before he put the solar system on, he was consuming 2,100. And now that he has his solar system on, he's only consuming 1,100.
Oh, so you're
So,
saying the
and-
generation reduces his draw.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Correct.
That's
Or he
right.
just consumes, he can just consume more, he can keep
He
his
can consume more, right,
thermostat
he can be,
at 68 during the
electrode,
summer,
and he
rather
can
than
consume way
72.
more. So, yeah,
Right, so,
Things running 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
yeah.
so what was?
Like me.
So what was in D was the credits that we issued. So frequently you ask me what's everybody else, we've talked what ComEd's doing, what Amherst, so I called our 4 adjacent neighbors. Batavia charges a $100 fee for setting the meter, which I've already told you.
But these are IMEA
These are,
people?
no, they're not, they're just municipal, because Batavia and Geneva are not IMEA.
Okay.
They're on their own, kind of different group. They're doing basically what we'll call the retail, the 1-to-1. Geneva's doing 1-to-1. Naperville's doing 1-to-1.
So these are all ComEd people?
No, these are municipal electric systems. Batavia and Geneva, all 4 of these have their own electric
right,
system
okay,
like
okay.
Temecula, but
Yeah.
Batavia and Geneva are not members of IMEA.
Right,
I
but-
see, okay, right.
But,
got it, right.
and their wholesale and retail costs were divided as, question mark, what were the actual values in those two?
They said they're giving 1-to-1 retail to retail, so I didn't go ask them what their rate was. I was looking at just the structure.
Because one thing I found in my research was that, I don't want to say something that makes us feel bad, but IMEA rates on the wholesale are a little higher than some of the other municipalities are perhaps paying. Maybe, but I don't know if we know that. So I don't have that deck in front of me to look at that. So if we're paying, like if they're getting their wholesale rate at 4 cents,
So-
then, and their retail rate, they're paying out at 8 cents, just say, then we're paying 6.6 cents, then, because it was seen, the industry person that I talked to was seeing that we had a generous wholesale rate. That's all I'm saying. I don't want to make that sound bad, like we're being unfrugal and that IMEA is overcharged. I'm not trying to make any of those, casting any aspersions on that, but apparently so I would be curious what their actual rate, wholesale and retail were.
I could tell you that for like Naperville and St. Charles, their retail rate is lower than our retail rate. And that gets all back into the philosophy of what costs you want each municipal utility to bear within their respective communities. Payment in lieu of taxes, administrative services, undergrounding, all those concepts figure into your retail rate.
So it's not apples and apples.
It becomes
In their
another
custom-
whole nother policy discussion.
We're not gonna do a rate study on that.
Right.
Please don't make me go
Not
through
while
that
I'm
again.
here.
Yeah.
And on the wholesale rate, it's tough because you got, people say, is it the energy, is it delivered to your substation gate? So then you got, it's usually more than just, is it a nickel, or is it 6 cents, or is it 4 cents? And I'm not saying what you said is incorrect, but it's just,
Right, it's
you
not,
gotta
it's
get to
not
apples to apples and make sure
right.
when you start trying to compare. So
Right,
what I looked
right.
at was, each of these communities has a retail, what they would call their wholesale rate of power, and they have a retail rate they charge their customers. So what's your policy, without like talking about the individual pennies? And 3 of the 4 are doing retail, which we will call the ComEd or the mandated 1-to-1 net metering. And 1 other entity is doing in a manner similar to what we're doing. An avoided cost, or this is what it would cost me to get the power, that's what I'm paying you for. So the options that were laid out in this, and again, obviously you can go where you want, but I tried to give you a framework, is you've got where we are today, you've got, which I call option 1, you've got option 2, which was full retail, option 3 was what was recommended by the EFC, which was where they were averaging the retail and the wholesale, and option 4, and just looking at it pragmatically to, okay, we've established, and I'm somewhat uncomfortable applying the study that, trying to bring light to this, and making assumptions has caused me a lot of frustration and passion with a lot of people, pro and con. But in trying to say there's potentially some merit to the argument or decision point that this is lowering our peak on the summer months, and summer's already defined here in the established village code, was saying a split the baby approach is offer retail for the summer months and wholesale when it's, pitch black at 7 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock at night when we're peaking, is offer wholesale. Those are summarized financially on page 25. So same thing I did for the credits is I said, okay, I'll take those 4 individuals and look at the energy they return and said, okay, here's what the credit value would be. So the top table on page 25 is the aggregate of the 4 customers we have today. And then for each customer, who shall remain nameless, Mr. B here, this is what would end up being for each of their respective customers. Again, maybe to use terms around that have been used, maybe not the exact sweet spot, still maybe doesn't address some of the things that the environmental committee and the larger policy decisions on carbon footprint. And then one last comment. So right now, IMEA is at the end of the year, will be at like a 10% renewable component with the green wind contract that was signed.
Right.
In addition to the Lead to Cal project that was already in the portfolio. They signed a longer, another contract that goes in effect in, I think it's, I wrote down, so 2025, another 25 megawatts with Ranger Power, which is a solar entity. So as things end, contracts come to an end, they're looking at evaluating lower carbon intensive resources. So there is things going on there at the larger level on that.
But we pay extra for, to.
That's in the portfolio for mine, it's the postage stamp that we get from
Right.
IMEA. So they're making those decisions on, the wind contract and stuff, and then
Didn't we used to pay extra?
we did, so a previous council decision, this was before IMEA got into renewables. The council, there was an interest in having a part of our residential energy to be green. And similar to some of what at the time was, some people are still doing this, is you can buy a renewable energy certificate.
Right.
And so the council directed staff to purchase a percentage of our residential energy consumption for a year to buy renewable energy certificates in an amount to cover a certain percentage of our total energy consumption for residential customers.
Mhm. But that fell off once IMEA got in
And
the
the
game.
theory,
Okay.
correct, sir. The theory was is now that IMEA has at least started to embrace adding renewables into the portfolio, why would we go continue to buy RECs at our own cost when it's now starting to get integrated into our rate from IMEA?
Gotcha,
And then
okay.
kind of, just as like real quick home, in perspective, and I know there's desire in the community to have more than 10% renewables, but I mean, the last disclosure from ComEd, if I'm reading their environmental disclosure right, they're at like around 7% right now. The state would like them to be higher than that, but like their last environmental disclosure, if I'm reading it correctly, looks like they're around 7%. But they're less carbon intensive because they're heavily nuclear.
Right.
But renewables is right around 7, to give you kind of a barometer.
Okay. I would like to get a sense of where everybody's at, whether options 1, 2, 3, or 4 are kind of what your preference, or is it something else? Just so we understand where, I'd like to take it back now,
30
Ted.
second public comment before you do that. 30 seconds. I want to point out that even if it went to net metering, as it's been one of the things that I didn't address, is that, yeah, we still pay for power. I can't talk about the other customers.
You still pay for what?
We still pay for power.
Gotcha.
I'm still net positive to the village.
Mhm.
I'm still paying you for power. So if I'm paying $2,400 a year, if I have a $300 credit, if it goes to a $600 credit, I'm still paying the village, $1,800 or whatever.
Right.
It's still, I think that's something.
No, you're not a commercial producer who's in the business
Right.
of doing it
Right.
Correct.
to profit,
Can I-
obviously.
Can I just throw out a suggestion as a place to start? Ted, I appreciate your reading the legislative intent behind that, because, I agree with Bob. I think, just on the whole, it makes sense to reimburse for the cost and not to include the infrastructure. But, if the legislative intent was to provide some sort of subsidy, and that's the state mandate, then I think that for now, I think the EFC suggestion is probably a good one to sort of cover us for the time being. I would really like to collect more data because, just having Ted's one experience, I don't know if that is representative of the other solar producers, and but I think we should continue to collect data as we can, however it makes sense. Ted, I really appreciate all you've done to help us, get the data. I don't necessarily, know that all the assumptions, would they cover all the other customers or not? So we probably need to work on that. This is, I think, is just like a short-term solution because obviously the technology is going to change and things are going to change. But to your point that if the barrier to entry is the high cost of permits and all that kind of stuff, I mean, maybe that's something else that we need to look at outside of this decision tonight to understand more in terms of what are the, what's involved in installing a renewable generation on a home site. So just as a place to start, I think that makes sense to me just for the time being. And, again, as the possibilities grow, I think we need to collect information and have more ideas going forth.
Okay. Next.
Steve, well, I can't read my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, no,
You got something to say, Steve?
Well, I think, yeah, a little bit. I think when people heard that you're only going to get 50 cents or 50% of what the rate was going to be, people saw that as a disincentive. And on the flip side, I know that maybe people thought at the village also people would get a big solar array and they would try to sell a bunch to the village, but that's not really what the solar companies want you to do. They just want you to get enough to take care of your own needs, and you're going to have a shortfall like he has in the winter. So that's not really something that is a concern, I don't think. The other thing is that the long-term thing, this is kind of what Andy was talking about, I guess, is that I know that in Iowa, I was told by a solar company, because I was going to try to put solar panels on a rental property that I had. And I think it's the number of people in Iowa who've done solar has gone up so much that the people who are not on solar are looking at a 25% surcharge on
Right,
their electrical bill.
that's what I was trying to say, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
But, that's a whole other issue because,
It is, but it's something
basically
that-
the inevitability of you have to go green because, otherwise we're going to all
But
roast.
that's why we need a context, right, for this discussion.
But it's like, the main thing is to try to do something about the environment and then work your way through the other things. And like Andy said, you do have the flexibility because you've got a longer horizon to deal with that. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah,
Oh,
but you're
well,
right,
thanks, Steve.
you're right.
So I'll chime in. Which I didn't get a chance really to do in 2015. It was such a
Excellent meeting.
Oh my God, it was an embarrassment. So I appreciate what you're all saying. I think where we're at in terms of we have very few customers that have gone solar. We have very high permitting costs. We haven't gotten to where we need to reduce those. That when I look at it, if we were to pay back at the retail, and I know Ted is not shy about saying that's a subsidy, that he supports the subsidy. I don't actually even see it as a subsidy at this point. I think we're not even giving back what we're taking with our permitting red tape. And I think until we address the economics that we are responsible for screwing up, we're not really in danger of a tipping point or anything else. We're kind of creating a situation where it just doesn't make financial sense to move forward. So what I would suggest, because I think you've made great suggestions, is, and I know it's on the EFC radar, let's get tackling those permitting costs like as a top priority. But until that's done, I would pay at the retail. When that permitting stuff is reduced, then maybe we switch back to wholesale, or maybe we switch back to the average of the wholesale and the retail. But I mean, it's just I don't really see there being a subsidy argument. We're taking it massively out of one pocket and we're giving back a little light in the other. That's not a subsidy. I think just as a practical matter, I probably wouldn't philosophically support the idea of a subsidy, even if I think it's the right thing. I think that the economics of the renewables it's there, as long as government gets the hell out of the way. Germany has proved that, Europe has proved that. So we are the problem, so we should try to offset that a little bit right now. That's how I see it, I don't see it as a subsidy. So I support the retail.
I'm psyched. I'm putting the system on and I just got payback in a shorter amount of time. I mean, I can go either way on this. I think that I agree with Andy in a sense of if it is the red tape is what is the most expensive piece of putting the system on the house. And I think that part of this, and that's why I asked at the beginning what the purpose is if we're trying to get people to want to do this, then, obviously you make the payback period shorter and people want to do it. I'm totally a green person, and so I, whatever. But I do think we have to look at it critically and, and not overpay. And so that we're not, because we do have a rich system if we're paying people back 12 cents on it. That's on the high end of retail, I think, if I'm not. So, that was just commentary for ourselves to be careful about. But yeah, I mean, I totally support it and want it to happen, and,
Which one do you like, Ann?
I'll do whatever the majority wants to do.
No, you gotta say.
I'll do any of it. I mean, I frankly like the summer one.
1, 2, 3, or 4.
I like the summer one better because philosophically I felt like it was, easy to understand, even though it's not directly helping with the peak hours, there is a relief there. So that one sort of felt good. But I mean, this is all like feeling, none of it is rational. Andy's point is a little more rational. If your, red tape costs are so much higher, then, maybe you should be paying 1 for 1. That's a little bit more of an economic argument. I don't really like the blended rate because I don't think that there's anything sustaining that. That's just kind of arbitrary to me.
I mean, the funny thing is, if we incentivize people to do this, we are the ones collecting those permit fees.
What are the,
Right.
I mean, it's,
Brian, what is the permit fee?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what we
I
need.
don't
We
know.
I
need
mean,
to
Andy,
understand that.
you make this permit fee sound like it's like taking down a building or something
No,
like that.
they're, so,
I mean-
So some of it may be blended in with, it depends upon the type of construction that's under, Ted, you built a new house, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so it may have been factored under all the new house fees. We'll just have to take a look. I didn't.
Yeah.
It's not a Brian fee, though, it's a community development fee.
No, it's not a fee that goes back to the utility.
From the utility that was.
$60.
levied from David, it's 60, nominally $60.
Right. Right.
So,
I mean, that's, we go out, we do the final test, make sure the warning labels are on, we plug the meter in, it's 60. The utility component is $60. Now, if you get to like a large house in Sheridan Road, the metering becomes more complex, but for what he's got, it's currently $60. It was 95, I think. Now it's like 60.
Price keeps
Price went down.
All right, I'm waiting for Jack and Bob to weigh in here.
Payback is very short.
Well, I think we're mixing issues here. I mean, I don't know about the permitting. I don't know that it's 60% of the cost. I don't know. I don't know what the costs are. All I know is that he has been treated unfairly. We need to treat him fairly. That's what we were here to determine. I spent some time with Brian on this, and just my back of the envelope was that just to make you whole would have been about 25%. If we did the summer, whatever, 35% more. If we do the EFC, it's 50% more.
I got 43 for the EFC and 46 for the
Okay.
summer.
Okay, so I'm in there. I'm not the retail guy. I mean,
so you're 3 or 4.
yeah, I'm somewhere 150% of retail or less, whatever. And I think that is sort of what we're here tonight to do. And if there are other issues on this, of wholesale, excuse me. If we're other issues on the table, we'll address them. But I think on this one, we just need to get these people, our residents, square.
So 3 or 4, Bob?
Three is what?
3 is EFC.
EFC.
That's
4 was
143%.
Brian's.
And 4 is 46%, based on
Yeah, I
2018.
kind of, with Ann, I mean, I kind of like that summer, the peak, that's when it's going to be used, and so I would do that.
it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Seems like it's more straightforward to do the number 4 than the number 3. I don't know. You
So-
don't have to calculate an average.
One of the questions that was asked to me was, what can I administer this all? All 4 options can be administered. So they'll let that be. I would say if you're gonna use the summer approach, I would ask you to keep it to the defined summer rate, which
Yeah.
is basically the 4 months with meter reading dates ending September, June, July, August, September. Because you're on a 2-month billing cycle, so that if you,
I do
Right.
like the logic of the.
That's when we're gonna use it.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I like it, it's
I'm not
clean,
opposed
feels
to
good.
that.
Okay.
I like number 1. No, 4 makes sense.
It does.
I mean,
That's why it
it seems to be answering the issue of when do we need the power, and when should we reward somebody for that as a village, when should we reward somebody for putting power back in? All the time, obviously, but mostly when it's most useful to us. And I think that we wouldn't, it reduces the concept of subsidy for people who are not in the system or who aren't paying the difference between the 6 and the 12. So I like 4.
Penny, can you move over one
Oh,
column?
yeah, I just threw that as a place to start. I was just respecting the EFCs, but it makes great sense to me. That's fine.
Yeah,
And Andy, I heard you were kind of saying that
Yeah.
you could live with that too,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's obviously not your optimal, and
No, but there is a clear logic to it. That,
And we have more work to do.
And we
so.
should look at these
and
fees.
yeah, and I think that's important too. More importantly than the rest of it.
It's budget time, we can look at those, right?
You want to get into that detailed budget, we can.
you want to get into that? Well, we're going to be there all day, so you got to pick your battles, though.
Yeah. How about if we come back?
It's a long
A little more
day.
detail on that.
Thank you for explaining all the basic details. As I said, I walked into this with a very different vision of what it all meant, so it took me a while to.
So it sounds like we're kind of leaning towards something that would be a little bit more generous than what EFC did. Ted, it won't be the pure net metering that you always refer to, but, I think net metering is still yet to be defined. I mean,
Well, and it's.
and I think our definition of it is, certainly one that leans towards equity and then a little bit more.
I guess I obviously have my opinions, and I'm a little disappointed. I would like to point out just a couple things. So first of all, I know we talk about me a lot, but I'm some cost, right? I did this, right? If you paid me nothing, I did it. And what I feel that I was trying to advocate for was the fact that, as we pointed out, there are 4 customers in Winnetka that have put up solar panels. And I think that's a travesty, that you can go to Wilmette, where the median household income is a lot lower, and you can find, what is it now, like 30 systems or something. I think it's a travesty. And I think a big part of that is because of the financial payback that people just aren't willing to accept. And I feel like we're still going down that road. And the other thing I would say is, and this is more tongue-in-cheek because I'm too busy not to do too much trouble. But I did find it funny because Batavia, as he pointed out, has that metering, and it looks like that all happened back like 2011, 2012, when a customer got upset because they put up panels. They had a net metering ordinance or something at the time, but then they found out they were also going to be getting so they started filing complaints with the Attorney General as a unfair, deceptive business practices on the part of the electrical utility. I don't know. I didn't look into this too much yet, but I'm just saying that if you're going to do that, you should change your title, because net metering, I think, is a very specific thing, and perhaps using St. Charles's generated renewable energy reimbursement, whatever.
so the title of the agenda report probably was not my best choice, but in the code,
Yeah,
it's
in
codified as
ordinances.
renewable and credits for renewable energy, so it doesn't lend itself to, it says here's how it's calculated, so it doesn't say net 1-to-1. And that would give the attorneys credit for how they shaped that prior to how and I.
Okay, I think you guys landed on a good place. I mean, we want to encourage this, there's no doubt about it.
Well-
We have to look to the future.
Well,
and-
and honestly, if there are more costs that are incurred by the permits and stuff like that, you're not gonna get that back in the kilowatt hour, that difference in the surcharge. I mean, we may be able to do more in other places, so.
Well, and maybe after we get the data,
Yeah,
if you
right.
guys find it compelling, you'll have a different view on it. Right now, I'm just kind of
Right.
relaying what I've heard at these things, so I don't expect it to hurt. So, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if
Well,
these
and-
fees are draconian, I mean, we should definitely solve it.
that for the EFC yet, we haven't gone down to that
I
level.
do find that hard to believe, having put a $35,000 hot water solar system on the house.
Yeah.
I do not think that my permitting costs were anywhere near
So
that.
it's not just permitting costs, it's the cost of regulation, which gets, to some extent, even baked into the device itself when it's sold in the United States, so the cost. So
But
there's
we
a lot of
can't,
stuff that-
affect that here.
We're a part of it, but we're not. It's because of building codes, right, that drives it, and we adopt these standard building codes. So, but maybe if the data is compelling, it's, that we're moving forward.
Well, and I think, if this is any indicator that the world is moving in the right direction, you can now go over to Harbor Freight and buy panels, literally, they're on the showroom floor, you can load them up in your pickup truck, drag them home, and if your roof is facing the right way, you can mount them up and you're in business. It really looks pretty simple. I've been looking at it, not for my house here or anything, but it's amazing. I mean, now you can go to, a low-end hardware store, and they're sitting out there on the shelf for purchase. And I'm sure Lowe's and Home Depot has them too. It's just amazing how far the accessibility to the technology has come. And we should do everything we can to support it, so. Well, great, that was a good conversation, thank you.
President Ryan, can I ask two quick clarifying
Sure.
questions? With respect to implementation, is it appropriate that we work as we do the rate resolution for the new coming budget year? that-
Talk to the boss on that.
Okay.
Yes.
Secondly, if I wanted to make
What do we do on an ordinance? Do we?
It's just,
It's a rate resolution.
I'll talk to the village attorney,
We
we
need
might
to
need to make a
clean up.
code change,
Yeah.
clarifying the code.
Mhm.
And would it, if I wanted to make I think a positive change towards allowing more solar than the original 10 kW would there be?
is there any technical reason? that-
Well, it was done with again, to President Ritz's comments, we were
Capacity.
starting out.
We didn't know what the hell we were doing. I
We
mean,
we looked at what other people were doing, and 10 was a very common limit. So I'm comfortable raising that or adding some engineering component to, here's a number we can live with, but we could further study if you want to go above that.
Is that to just to be sure that there isn't somebody with more commercial intent? Was that?
Well, for example, I've had an inquiry from a commercial building that has a flat roof, or a condo building that has a flat roof.
mhm.
I mean,
They
that,
could
we
theoretically
didn't
put
talk
up more
about
than
that.
10. And so the question is, I've told them, well, when you complete your due diligence and whether you'd even get to 10, bring it, because I could see conceptually supporting a customer that's bigger than a house that would want to put on more than 10 kW.
Interesting.
We have to carve out a commercial section for residential.
Right,
yeah.
so
And would
is
we,
there?
and would we compensate commercial?
Yeah, we'll get you on a study session for
Okay.
that sometime in
Okay.
2020.
And then the last piece, which was in the report, but just for the people that are watching this and for President Wedner, ComEd lost their last appeal. So you can now municipal customers can participate in what's now called Illinois Shines rebate component through aggregators that are getting the credits from the state of Illinois.
Great.
So the state of Illinois to incentivize solar is, I don't know if rebate's the right term, but is basically prepaying their value of renewable energy credits, like 15 years of credits. It's going through solar aggregators. That fund for the state of Illinois was funded by ComEd customers. It's a line item on our bills. When they implemented the program, they did not differentiate. They said it's available to all Illinois customers. ComEd challenged that under the context of Trustee Wedner didn't pay for that,
Right.
but she didn't get the benefit.
Right.
It's went through several legal proceedings, and the state's simplifying this. The state's view is we're promoting it in the state of Illinois. It doesn't matter where the funds were collected from, it's coming to the state of Illinois. So previously, if she would have called me about putting in solar, I would have said, if you're counting on these credits, be careful, they may not be there when you get to implementing your system. As of the end of September, the state has said, if you go through the process, you're eligible for those credits even if you're in a municipal environment,
Which is a good thing.
which is a good thing for all the Winnetka
Yeah,
customers.
lowers it even more,
Yep.
make your payback.
That's nice, it's something we didn't pay for. I like that.
Well, you did, it has been on our bill.
No, it's,
No.
on my bill.
Kind of have a fascinating argument, because I actually, if you you look through the docket, you'll see my name, because I didn't know where to send my comments to, and couldn't figure out how to use the website, so I sent an email to like all the attorneys, and so then they had to like file that as a ex parte communication. But what was fascinating, ComEd's argument was fascinating, because ComEd was also allowed to bring in customers that were outside the state of Illinois into the program. So they were arguing that, oh, our customers outside of Illinois can come in and partake in this, but in state of Illinois customers that, like IMEA customers couldn't, because they weren't paying into the fund. It was a fascinating, like, if you read their argument, it was kind of like a very
So
nuanced.
can their out-of-state customers participate?
I don't know what they decided about that. I don't know what they decided. I mean, I think they might because of the way it's written, I think, but it was a very nuanced argument on the part of ComEd to try to exclude a subset of people that they.
There's a lot of money behind the scenes moving around too, so.
Thank you for your policy direction.
Okay, well, let's go walk the dog. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Good conversation.